little while. I've moved, decided to maybe start doing some more regular video content again now that my schedule is sorted, now that LPL is about to start up, it works out, it's working as intended. Last year, if you remember, I did this thing called LPL Immersion. I did it bi-weekly. I'm not sure if I'm going to do it bi-weekly this time. Maybe every week, maybe every other week, maybe every 3 weeks, because the LPL format is broken down into 9 weeks, right? And there's 3 rounds. For those who don't remember, LPL Immersion is kind of like a power ranking where I go through each team in terms of relative order to where I think that they're strong, to where I think that they have problems. So I'm going to go through all 12, and I'm actually going to give the relative ranking of each team, ignoring the group format. And previously, I've done tier lists. All Esports has done tier lists, but sometimes it's just really nice to lay them out in a format that's close to relative rank. Maybe there's a bigger gap between two teams. Maybe two teams are approximately similar in strength, but this is where I see them. This is what's going on. Let's begin. Number 12 is going to be Hyper Youth Gaming. This is probably not too much of a shock to anyone who's been watching the LPL at all. It's not that they're just bad and irredeemable, but their ceiling is really, really low, even when they start to fix some of the issues that are showing up. So first of all, starting with some of the good things going for Hyper Youth Gaming, they have a pretty decent jungler. I think that Milky, or March as he's been calling now, has been a pretty solid pickup if you're just looking at LSPL Chinese junglers, who is one of the better ones. He was one of the better ones, and I actually think that he is an improvement over YOLO, who is actually no longer jungling anymore, but we'll get to that. Because YOLO previously played for Hyper Youth Gaming. Milky has this aspect where he really, really tries to force things and they backfire. So he's trying to be a proactive jungler, and he actually had some moments going for him where he was making more things work in a game against Edward Gaming than Clearlove in the Hyper Youth Gaming set. So that was really exciting for him. But the problem is that he, as well as the rest of the team, they force these things that they can't really force. I think that Hyper Youth Gaming have a pretty good understanding of when to contest an objective, when dragons are important, when Rift Herald is important, when turrets are important. I want to go to this turret now because right now we just got the outer rings of turrets, and the mid lane turret is really not terrible in lane swaps. They're probably better in lane swaps than Edward Gaming, for example, but this almost backfires against them because I feel like there's an ideal way to play the game if you're a good team, you know? The ideal way to play the game if you're a good team is to wait for opportunities, to force things that are forcible, if so to speak, to understand which objective to go to collapse and set up the flanking wards in the proper way. These are kind of small things that are ideal that I think that Hyper Youth Gaming occasionally does not terribly, but when you do them and you're Hyper Youth Gaming and you don't have the best players, you don't have the most coherent dynamic, it's not the best way for you to play the game. If you are a team with a lot of flaws, you can actually play to a higher ceiling by maybe playing in a way that's incorrect. For example, let's talk a little bit about LGD. You know, they had a pretty good objective priority, but they would do things like having their support roam a considerable amount, not getting Imp involved in action until much, much later in the game, and just giving him to free farm just because their jungler was super awkward and couldn't really jungle on his own. These are adaptations that LGD made to acknowledge that they have flaws, and they can't necessarily have their jungler be the most action-oriented or the most proactive member of the team. Obviously, this isn't Hyper Youth Gaming's problem, but some things that they could be doing is lane swapping more, avoiding more confrontation. Honestly, people have said good things about Gosu, but to me, he's just really not cutting it. He's not able to exert his own pressure. His CS at 10 value is actually the lowest in the league. It's like 9.8 something, which isn't necessarily a big knock against him because other mid laners in the league are extremely aggressive, in Group B are extremely aggressive, and they can really control the flow of the lane, like Rookie, like Pawn, Easy Hoon even. Uh, he played against Cool, and Cool had a pretty good laning phase, even if some of his team fight moves were a little bit questionable on his earlier Lux pick. But the point is that if they're looking at Gosu to kind of be their control point, it's not gonna work out. They need to do something else. When you're in that situation, chances are it's just not gonna be good, generally speaking. I think their bottom lane is fairly okay, but when you're an okay bottom lane and that's probably your better lane, you're still in trouble. Yeah, it's really hard to talk about Hyper Youth Gaming because I feel like it's been a while where you look at a team in the LPL and their upside is just so low, right? Because even last year when you had the bottom tier teams were unlimited potential and King, they still had really great players who had great ceilings. And by players, I mean Heart and Name and once upon a time Insect, but not at the time that he was playing for King. You understand what I'm saying. The Hyper Youth Gaming is just weird. And I talked a lot more about Hyper Youth Gaming than I probably should have because they're so strange. They're just bad. Like I can't really. They're terrible. Energy Pacemaker All, sort of a similar situation, but I think that they have some players who are of a higher upside. You have Crisis and Jezo, who I think are really solid right now. Crisis is one of the good rookie junglers. I think he has a future in competitive League of Legends, but probably not with his team. Energy Pacemaker All is one of those teams that has a really solid early game rating. They work really well. They manage to get leads consistently. They put a ton of gold onto their top laner. Typically, fighting for them. They have a system that works. They have Crisis. I do not enjoy their AD carry. Their AD carry is pretty not good. Republic has a really solid pressure in the laning phase, contrary to Gosu, who I think so it should be really interesting to see Republic against some of these Group B mids next round, since he's a Group A player in Group A. Kind of throw consistently. I think it's because they try to team fight with their AD carry or they move indecisively. When you watch an Energy Pacemaker All game, you can kind of see that they want to avoid fighting, but they don't know how to fight. And when they do end up in a team fight, because they stall out these games, there's this really long lull period where they just don't do anything. That's usually when teams take control. But their AD carry is really Romantic is really depressing to watch. He doesn't really output a lot of damage. I don't think he auto-attacks too much. He gets focused really easily. So I think that's a big flaw in their team fighting. So it's probably why they try to avoid doing it, because they know that they're at the stage of the game where they throw if they team fight, and they throw if they don't do anything. So they just sit there and they don't do anything. That's Energy Pacemaker All. This is a lot of fun so far. Number 10 is LGD Gaming. LGD, probably a team that few people expected to be here. I kind of was low on them, but then I spent time talking to other people, analysts of the scene, and decided to not be low on them, which I still regret. This is why I don't talk to other people in the LPL. This is why we're different, and this is why I'm going to be more adamant about our differences, because LGD Gaming, their communication-based issues, their process of approaching the game is horrendously just not good. I made an entire video about that, so I'm probably just going to link that into the comment section. But the issue is that it's very clear they're not communicating. They're playing these scaling picks to try to make comeback games, and I think part of the issue is that they're funneling all this gold resource onto Imp, who's just free farming the side wave, and this is a strategy that hasn't been good. Maybe the introduction of Kog'Maw on patch 6.3 will be really good for them, because that style will suddenly seem attractive, but right now, it's like they're systematically losing every lane, and it's really depressing. So, though weirdly, Marin, Imp, and Duelist all have positive CS differences at 10 minutes. Yeah, I don't understand why that they lose in objectives really, really hard because they're not making movements together, they're not communicating, they're not understanding objective priority, and they're picking like Ezreals, they're picking Lucia and then letting it free farm. They're picking champions at top that don't make any sense. So I think this is another issue that LGD have is in drafting and understanding where their strengths are and understanding what they have to do to get out of their rut. Now that we've already seen LGD at number 10, where do we go from here? Number 9 is Masters 3. I'm really surprised Masters 3 is this high, to be completely honest. I had Masters 3 and OMG at the bottom initially. And we haven't even talked to OMG yet, so that kind of gives you an idea of the state of the league. Masters 3 have been unafraid to address the very obvious issues they had with jungle and side lane communication. So, they took their Korean jungler YOLO and put him in the top lane, which is probably a terrible idea. YOLO, this will be another lane role swap for him, used to play support for Winterhawks. He's a jungle main, so he should be a jungler. However, I think the issues with communication were really problematic, and they had a top laner who seemed to only play one champion. XY seemed to only play Trundle effectively, so they decided to put their jungler top. Because even if he can only play one champion or two champions, and so far he's played 80 carries, because jungler 80 carry, logical, right? No. He's played 80 carries that can be in the jungle. He's played Quinn, he's played Graves. So, and he hasn't done terrible. He's actually done okay in lane. It's really bizarre. But the point is that they did something that seemed almost logical in addressing an issue they had, which is they had a very confined top laner who couldn't really play carries. They had a jungler who wasn't communicating well with lane, so they put him top, and they introduced a Chinese jungler, Scenery, again, part of the jungle revolution. See, I'm talking about all of these Chinese amateur jungle revolutions, but I'm talking about them in the bottom 4, which should give you an indication of kind of what it amounts to, right? Which is not very much. No, I think these junglers are pretty solid in terms of talent, and we'll see them in bigger teams later, but right now we're kind of at the beginning of their careers. Scenery used to go by Joy. He was the sub for OMG, and he had a lot of games where he showed promise. Right now, Scenery is actually towards the top of percentage of team gold. He's towards the top of kill participation. He's being a very proactive player. Masters 3 have a pretty good early game rating yet again. They seem unafraid of lane swaps, and actually they're one of the better lane swapping teams. They were one of the teams that kind of took it to Snake in a lane swap. They adapted really quickly and were able to figure out kind of what Snake were doing in the lane swap. Also, out lane swap WE, who's the other big lane swapping team. So, they're not terrible. Masters 3, they have some things going for them. I think their bottom lane with PentaQ and Savoki has actually been very solid, surprisingly more solid than I would have thought. I actually rank PentaQ right now in my top 4 performing 80 carries. That may not tell you a whole lot, but to me it means something. I mean, I know right now the 80 carry talent kind of sucks because all these 80 carries are stocked on top of teams, so the ones that are actually playing is pretty low. And he's been doing well. Savoki has been really, really good at making stuff happen. He's played a lot of weird stuff like Blitzcrank, right? But I think they're just looking for a way to utilize this playmaking talent that he has because their team is just looking for a way to improve upon what they have, which isn't much right now. Mid laner is pretty confined to playing like Corki, for example. That's worked really well for them. It's kind of a mess. They don't have a whole lot in terms of strategy other than being able to react to lane swaps well. Number 8 is another surprisingly low placement, Vici Gaming, to go along with LGD Gaming. They used to be partner organizations. Shh, don't tell Ryan. Actually, they already know and they did nothing about it. Because there's no paperwork. It's all a ghost project. There's nothing, no. Don't pay any attention to the waving of my hands. They're not partner organizations anymore, actually. So, it's irrelevant. But, Vici Gaming, of team play, I think Easy has looked really confused and out of place. He can play a few champions really effectively, I think, and that's when he goes back to comfort. It's when he goes back to the Azir, for example. But a lot of times he just looks really confused. He hasn't done as well as people expect him to do. Dandy, I think, has also sort of fallen back on some of these comfort picks and not been able to find success with him. Like that one series against IG where he just fixated on Rengar because clearly I played Rengar against him, so clearly he's the Rengar player and Rengar must be good. And I don't know Dandy's thought process, but it was weird. Their bottom lane is really bad. I think this is a trend. I keep talking about these AD carries that are just or bad, or the AD carry talent pool in LPL is kind of not good, depressingly bad. Partly because some of the really good ones are all on one team, right? Doubled up on one team. I like to talk about Endless. We did find a champion he can play, which is Ezreal, so that's very exciting, because Ezreal's actually a meta. Yay! Has never played Misfortune again. Never. Never. Just don't. Don't do it. Caveman may have a future. He's okay. He's fine. He's serviceable. He does dumb stuff, but he's able to react okay. He's able to peel fine. So I think Caveman is not a big problem. Long, they're putting a lot of pressure on Long to be the carry, but it's not really working out for him. I think Long did a good job against Looper and against Arc from OMG, but has kind of failed to find good footing in other sets. When he isn't playing Rengar is steadily improving. So I think that Vici Gaming have an understanding of what they want to do. They lane swapped correctly in their last series. I speak of lane swapping correctly so highly because it's kind of weirdly rare in the LPL. If you want to read my article, especially Group B where Vici Gaming is, if you want to read my article about it, I published how there's different metas in Group A and Group B. So that will be an interesting interaction, but Group B doesn't really lane swap ever. Like, IG has never been in a lane swap game. It's so weird. Edward Gaming has been in one lane swap game. So strange. So I think that Vici Gaming have a fairly high ceiling, but we're not seeing it at all. Partly because their bottom lane is so bad. Partly because they haven't been able to convert on the things that were perceived to be their strengths. Partly because Dandy thinks he can play Rengar right now. When you need a lot of team coordination to effectively play Rengar right now. Thankfully Rengar is getting nerfed, so we probably won't see him try it again. Number 7! I said I'd bring up OMG, and so now I am bringing up OMG. I'm just probably going to talk about OMG and IG at the same time. Number 7 and number 6, they're in Group B. They've been weirdly winning a lot of games. Invictus Gaming took a series off RNG. OMG made RNG play really, really long games. I think the things that they have going for them is that they ward, and OMG knows how to lane swap. OMG is like the only lane swapping team in Group B. Pretty much. They've initiated lane swaps 5 times, and by that I mean just send their dual lane top, which doesn't necessarily suggest that they're trying to initiate a lane swap, but it's a lot more than any other teams have tried to even send their dual lane top. Also very, very good at farming, so this will give them an initial gold advantage. Like, a lot of OMG players are good at farming. SMLZ leads the AD carry CS at 10 difference ranking. Yeah, it's strange. Like, SMLZ, literally all he does is farm, though. This has been my problem with him, and the constant overvaluing of SMLZ is that he's weirdly good at farming, but he doesn't do much with it. He's the kind of player that Forgiven would absolutely hate. Let's put it this way. Young has looked better. I think being able to play the same role for more than a split in a competitive game has been good for him. He's also able to benefit from a lot of these champions being very, very helpful to boosted top laners, like Poppy. Yeah, it's good. Played the Nautilus too. I don't know, LPL is just so obsessed with the Nautilus, but hey! It's actually maybe good now in the new patch, so it's exciting. I haven't said a whole lot. TBQ Chuen has been able to pick Lee Sin too many times. I don't understand. It's like they didn't watch Worlds. Because the first thing that happens is a team bans Lee Sin, and OMG go on this, not OMG, LGD go on this terrible spiral out of control, and then he goes back to the LPL and people stop banning it against him again. It's been this very obvious thing that you can do to completely destabilize TBQ. I actually pathed one of his games against Clearlove. He did almost twice as many actions on Lee Sin than other champions. It's like his brain turns on when he's playing Lee Sin, and it's otherwise dormant. So I just... Anyway, OMG is probably inflated, partly because of Lee Sin, partly because they're just good at farming, so they can surprise teams that haven't quite figured themselves out yet. Partly because they've lane swapped against Group A teams that can lane swap, they probably won't do as well. Number 6, Invictus Gaming. I'm surprised it's here too. I mean, Kid Jungle. Kid Jungle is not actually good, by the way. This is a meme that has taken off. The one thing Kid Jungle does is he wards. Weird. MLXG, maybe you should consider doing it, since you got wrecked by the fact that a jungler wards. No, literally, Invictus Gaming have a very simple system. Get Rookie ahead. Rookie likes his weird Chinese team. I don't know why. He's actually really likes China and his weird Chinese team, so he's been consistently trying to perform for them. Kid just has to ward around mid and kind of keep the area clear. The Tai continuously just teleports top. It's funny because OMG and IG have both had this problem where their top laner will just consistently use their teleport to return to lane. That's all they do. So watching their set was actually really funny because they would push each other out and teleport back. IG have been doing really well just based on the fact that they have a very clear system. Also, Time has been getting Kalista a lot. Kalista, he was kind of known as a Kalista player in solo queue. His Kalista hasn't even been that great, right? But it's like the only champion he can play other than Lucian, who's just broken anyway. They have all these really weird defective pieces, but because they understand their system and how to work together and how to get Rookie ahead, they've been winning games. Oh, and Kid wards. This is important. They haven't lane swapped a single time, as I've said, so I have no idea how they're going to do in that situation. I guess we'll find out, right? Because they play Snake this first week, and Snake literally lane swaps like every single game. There have been 2 of 13 of their games where they haven't been in a lane swap, which is 5. Team WE. Why is Team WE so high? Well, frankly, other teams suck. Then they're not that good either. This is just the reality of the situation. Snake is WE is at number 5 because I think they have very solid components. They understand lane swaps proficiently enough to be able to handle it. Mystic has been performing really well. I think their bottom lane may be in contention for one of the best bot lanes in the LPL because Mystic and Zero have been so good so far. Really solid together. Mystic is probably the best Ezreal player I've seen. As in this split. Not ever in my entire life, because then I'd also mention Wei Xiao. I'd also mention a bunch of Ezreal players that are really good. But Mystic's Ezreal has been pretty spot on. The problem with WE is that I think they don't really come together until the late game, so they are probably the antonym of EPA. A lot of their games have been comebacks, team fights around their AD carry. Shia has been able to get control of the lane phase in select situation, but I still think his champion pool is a bit of a problem. 957, I think, is a little uncomfortable. There will be games where he'll show that he has a good ceiling and he can outplay the enemy top laner, but most of the time he just kind of does weird stuff. I think that all of their pieces have pretty good ceilings. Oh, and Condi's been playing out of his mind, to be honest. So that's exciting for him. Condi is actually in the top 3 of percentage of Team Gold junglers with Clearlove and Swift. And he's had some impressive Baron steals. That's been part of their comeback mechanism. He's, except for the weird Rengar game, usually been really effective with early champion leaves. I don't know what it is about this Rengar thing. Clearlove is ruining LPL. That's why WE is number 5. Snake Esports. They're actually really bad. But they are the best lane swapping team in China. The best. They can get ridiculous, gross leads just through lane swapping. Their initial gold lead at 10 minutes is the highest. They have the second highest gold lead at 20 because Royal Never Give Up is really weird. But they are able to move around the map really intelligently. Like when people ask me what games to watch, I say every QG game and the first 10 minutes of every Snake game. After that, turn it off because they completely fall apart. I don't know what they're doing in team fights anymore, which is really depressing because last year they were one of the two best team fighting teams in China, I think. They just seem to be really uncoordinated. Flandre goes in at awkward times. Martin and Crystal both seem to have problems with not positioning correctly. Ella's peel has been out of sync with Tank's engage and area of effect laydowns. It's been really awkward. Tank isn't as good as you. I'm just going to say this right now. He's not. I don't understand why he's being played. He has obvious champion pool limitations. He's done really well on Corki, but hey, Corki is freelo, so this doesn't mean anything at all. Nope. They're just out of sync. Like, I think the thing that made Snake really, really good at teamfighting last year was that Flandre had the balls to do the engage, you had the cleanup, and the ability to reset and fix problems with really good ultimate placements if things went wrong. So these two in conjunction balanced each other really well. They were super specialists. They weren't the most well-rounded players, but the flaws that they had were really, really well compensated for by the other solo laner. Tank and Flandre have been working out as well. When you have this system, you can have Martin pretty much not do anything, so it doesn't matter if he isn't positioning correctly. You can have Crystal pretty much not do anything. So I think this is a big issue, and if they're picking up Tom, maybe that means that they'll put him in the jungle, because I think CZR's pressure has also been really inconsistent and not good at all. His pathing's been really awkward, just generally. So I think that I don't necessarily think Tom will be a direct upgrade initially. It will help their late game a lot, and if they're just creating lane swap scenarios anyway, it doesn't matter a whole lot where Tom's pressure is, because they can just focus on creating leads through manipulating turrets and advantages in that regard. Really good at knowing when to freeze and knowing when to push, because this allows them to minimize their own turret damage and just take free turrets all the way to your base at like 15 minutes. I don't know. It's really weird. And then they lose because they are so bad at team fighting. But they're number 4. That should tell you about the state of the league right now. Now we finally get into the only 3 decent teams in the LPL, which are Royal Never Give Up, Edward Gaming, and QG. Spoiler, I just gave away the order. Royal Never Give Up is number 3. Conflicted about Royal. I think that they are a really solid momentum-based team, and by that I mean if they get a lead, they're really good at playing off of it. They aren't the team that throws too much. Their recent game against IG accepted because they played troll picks and just tried to style completely and didn't really focus on creating a composition. But they had the earliest first Baron timer, so they just grabbed the Baron at 25 minutes first Baron on average, and then they steamroll through the rest of the game really cohesively. But their first 25 minutes is actually not that great. Their first 10 minutes, in particular, they actually average a gold deficit at 10 minutes. So when people think of MLXG, they think of him as this great high-pressure jungler who creates these leads for Royal, and really it's just the other jungler weirdly invading and feeding. Like, that's what it is. MLXG actually has farmed considerably with Graves. I think this is a weird misconception about both MLXG and Swift, is that they actually farm a lot sometimes. They pick champions like Graves and they have very low pressure. If they pick Nidalee or Rek'Sai, sure, they'll have pressure, but if they play Graves, which they've both favored considerably, they just farm. No. MLXG doesn't work. So this is why they lost to IG, because Kids at ganks were more effective than MLXG's because he had wards in place, and MLXG did not. So Kid knew when their collapse would come, he knew when to push out, or when the wave could be controlled. Rookie, of course, obviously has a lot of power over this because he can create situations for the jungler to have pressure. But I got really frustrated researching Royal because I think MLXG is a very talented player. He just has a lot of hangups in some of these regards with warding and other aspects of the game. Xiaohu, I think, is fairly talented, if a little overrated for a Chinese player. He's a pretty good champion pool. He's been doing solidly on LeBlanc. He's been doing solidly on Victor, on some other things. He's really good at Jace. They hasn't played it recently. So he's been kind of the player who can fit these crevices that they create, and this is usually based around Wraith player. Looper has just fixated on split pushing mostly and creating a foldable map. I talked about this in my Royal video, and I also talked about this in my Royal article, so I won't go into it too much here. Mata, really solid playmaker. He's doing well. There have been games where they've drafted really strange and terrible compositions, but where Mata is the only tank on Alistar, and he still is able to engage and create opportunities for them to teamfight, so that's really exciting. Whoosh, I think, has been an issue because he'll just go full UZI roll into things, but he won't have the upside that gets him out of situations. So I think that these are all factors that Royal needs to work on. They keep them from being as good as the first or second place team. Please ward. Just ward. For the love of God, MLXG, you just buy a pink ward. Get a tracker's knife! Yes! Can you not? Who buys blue smite? Just honestly, who buys blue smite right now? Gaming is number 2. Edward Gaming is number 2 because they're really good at team fighting, they have good coordination, their players are strong. Clearlove has excellent understanding of map pressure, and he's able to create these situations really well. They're number 2 because they're terrible at lane swaps. I've been talking about these teams like, okay, The reason why I've been mentioning it so much is because Edward Gaming is actually terrible at lane swapping. One of the top 2 teams in the league does not have any idea what they're doing at all. At all. Nope. The one game where they were forced to lane swap, OMG got a clear lead. They almost pushed the inhib super early. Edward Gaming just kind of collapsed on themselves. They fell behind. They didn't really do much of anything. They got picked out. They just completely deteriorated. Oh, and Pawn got solo killed by Icon like twice. Icon is an interesting player. I will say that. But we're not talking about OMG anymore. Highly, because if you can dismantle them that easily with what I consider to be a very simple lane swap meta. It's not hard, guys. Come on. Figure it out, LPL. What is this? Then they're not good. That's the problem. Like, their team fighting has been great. Coro1 is always able to maximize his presence with TP re-engage. Deft is really strong, and he's like Corki, Ezreal. Really good champions right now. He's great on those champions. His Kalista is still awkward sometimes, but it's fine. Pawn has been off and on, as usual, but he's able to create pressures and distractions, and that's his entire point in Edward Gaming, I swear to God. Though he's been getting a lot more gold resources lately, but I think that's highly inflated by his game against Gosu. Because Gosu is terrible. Pawn distract him. But Icon actually had his way with him, and Icon is still a rookie, and Icon is still... Verdict is out. But he's done weirdly good in Group B with all this stacked, allegedly, theoretically stacked mid lane talent. QG Reapers. I think their approach to lane swapping is interesting, because they demonstrate, if you watch their game, that they know what's happening to them. They opt into the initial turret push, but then they send Pekka top to freeze. And they do this a lot depending on the jungle pick. So if the jungle pick is a high farming jungle pick, guys, Swift farms. He farms most of the game. He just farms. I know you watched the LGD series, and it was awesome because he played Rek'Sai. But most of the time, he just farms. They do this when Swift is on a farming jungler, so that they can freeze the lane, they can stall for late game, they can get CS leads on their players. when he plays Rek'Sai, they want more standard lanes, so they actually counter-swapped in UCI's games. Not because, but because Swift was playing Rek'Sai, and they wanted to be able to utilize the increased ganking pressure from their jungler in standard lanes. The Snake is really good at lane swapping, and they played it against it once. They figured they can counter it, but it was obnoxious, so they went back. But when they do this freezing method, they like to place out wards. They place out wards that cover the lanes so that Swift can farm safely, so that their sideliners can farm safely, so that Doinb can farm safely, so that everyone is happy. And then they force fights around mid-game, and they close out really fast after that. So QG is an interesting team to watch. They don't have the most again, when we talked earlier in the video about playing optimally for your limitations, I think that QG have an approach that is very intelligent and that it's deliberate, and they obviously practiced it a lot, so it goes off usually pretty well. Swift has some fundamental issues with ganking early or setting up correct ganking pathways that make them a bit more inconsistent, that they have to compensate for with some of these weird lane swap styles. So this is... Oh, and Doinb's weird too. Doinb plays a lot of scaling picks still. The ADKs play a lot of scaling picks still. They've played a lot of Ezreal, so... I don't know, I think they're a really good team because, like I said, everything that they do feels deliberate for the most part, except for, obviously, they don't want to fall behind a ridiculous amount of gold. But the way that they play reactionarily feels very deliberate, so I think that QG are probably the only, like, really good team in China right now. Watch QG, watch the first 10 minutes of every Snake game, and watch the rest if you really like it.